The unthinkable. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. I've always feared middle-of-the-night calls, those harbingers of news too terrible to wait for daylight. My trembling hand reached for the phone on the third ring. "Mrs. Reynolds? This is Mercy Hospital. Your son, James, has been admitted with a suspected brain aneurysm. You should come immediately." The world tilted on its axis. At 65, I had lived through my husband's death a decade earlier, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. James, my brilliant, kind-hearted only child, couldn't be dying. It wasn't the natural order of things. I arrived at the hospital still wearing my nightgown beneath my coat, hair uncombed, hands shaking as I gave my name at the reception desk. A grim-faced doctor led me to a private consultation room, and the words that followed destroyed my world. Massive aneurysm. No warning signs. Nothing could have been done. Already gone. Already gone. My James, gone. Hours blurred together as paperwork was processed, and decisions no mother should ever make were thrust upon me. It was nearly noon when Sophia, James's wife of 10 years, finally arrived. Designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, expensively manicured nails, tapping impatiently on her phone. "There was traffic," she offered without meeting my gaze, "and I had to find someone to watch Lucas. I had already called Lucas's school, spoken with his teacher, and arranged for him to spend the day with his best friend's family." The fact that Sophia hadn't thought to do this, that she'd left their 8-year-old son without information about his father's condition, was sadly typical of the woman my son had married. "James is gone," I said simply, watching for the reaction that would tell me how to respond. Sophia's perfectly lipsticked mouth formed a small O of surprise. Her hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture that might have seemed natural if I hadn't spent years observing my daughter-in-law's calculated performances. "But he was fine yesterday," Sophia said, her voice catching. "We had dinner, and then he was working in his study. I went to bed early. I didn't even say goodnight." For a moment, genuine regret seemed to flash across her face, quickly replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Relief? Calculation? Whatever emotion had surfaced was quickly masked by a more appropriate expression of shock. As the day progressed, I watched Sophia make phone calls in hushed tones, stepping away whenever hospital staff approached with questions about funeral arrangements. When decisions needed to be made about James's remains, Sophia deferred to me with a casualness that seemed oddly detached. "You know what he would have wanted better than I do." By evening, as we waited for James's body to be released to the funeral home, Thomas Bennett arrived, James's closest friend since law school and his personal attorney. His genuine grief was apparent in his reddened eyes and tight embrace as he held me. "I can't believe he's gone," Thomas whispered. "I just had lunch with him on Monday." I nodded, unable to form words through my grief. Thomas turned to Sophia, offering condolences that were met with a practiced, somber nod. "We'll need to meet soon," Thomas said, his professional tone returning slightly. "There are matters in James's will that will need immediate attention." Sophia straightened at this, dabbing at eyes that remained suspiciously dry behind her sunglasses. "Of course. Perhaps tomorrow? I'd like to get things settled quickly for Lucas's sake." The mention of my grandson pierced through my fog of grief. Lucas. Sweet, sensitive Lucas, who had lost his father and whose mother was already thinking about settling things quickly. "Lucas should be told in person," I said firmly. "I'll go with you to pick him up." "That's not necessary," Sophia replied quickly. "I can handle my own son." The slight emphasis on "my" wasn't lost on me. It was a familiar dynamic, Sophia asserting control over Lucas when it suited her narrative as devoted mother, while relegating actual parenting to James and, increasingly, to me. "He adores you," Sophia added, her tone softening artificially. "He'll need his grandmother more than ever now." The manipulation was transparent to me. After 30 years as a psychology professor, I'd studied enough human behavior to recognize what she was doing. Sophia was already positioning herself, ensuring I would remain available for childcare while establishing clear boundaries of authority. As we left the hospital, I caught sight of Sophia checking her reflection in a window, adjusting her hair before pulling out her phone to make another call. In that unguarded moment, with no audience to perform for, her face showed neither grief nor shock, only cool assessment, like someone calculating their next move in a chess game. I turned away, my heart breaking anew. Not only had I lost my beloved son, but it appeared my grandson was in the hands of a woman who saw his father's death as an inconvenience at best, an opportunity at worst. What I couldn't know then was that James had foreseen this very scenario and had taken extraordinary measures to protect both me and his son from the woman he had finally recognized as a threat to us both. In the coming days, as I struggled through the fog of grief to arrange my son's funeral, I would begin to uncover the breadth of James's foresight and the depth of Sophia's deception. But that night, as I returned to my empty house alone, I could only clutch my son's childhood photo to my chest and wonder how I would find the strength to face the days ahead. For Lucas, I told myself, I must be strong for Lucas. Something in Sophia's behavior had triggered every protective instinct I possessed. My grandson had lost his father. I was determined he wouldn't lose his grandmother too, not when I suspected he would need me more than ever. A devastating midnight call has shattered my world, but something doesn't feel right about my daughter-in-law's reaction to my son's death. What secrets was James keeping about his failing marriage? And what measures did he take to protect us before his untimely death? I couldn't know then that my greatest challenge as a mother was just beginning. I've attended enough funerals in my 65 years to recognize genuine grief. It manifests differently in each person. Some collapse inward, some rage, some grow eerily calm. But there's an authenticity that can't be fabricated. As I sat in the front pew of the church watching people approach my son's casket, I observed a masterclass in emotional performance from my daughter-in-law. Sophia had dressed impeccably in a designer black dress that managed to be both appropriate and flattering. Her hair was styled in subdued waves, her makeup subtle yet flawless, tear-proof mascara evident as she dabbed occasionally at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She leaned against me at calculated intervals, murmuring things like, "He would have appreciated such a turnout," and James always spoke so highly of everyone here. To observers, we appeared as a united front of grief, the devastated widow and the heartbroken mother supporting each other through unimaginable loss. Only I could feel how lightly she rested against my shoulder, ready to straighten the moment someone important approached. Only I noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, assessing each mourner's social and financial status. Only I caught the subtle changes in her voice when speaking to James's wealthier clients versus his childhood friends. But my attention was primarily focused on Lucas, seated on my other side, his small body occasionally shaking with silent sobs. Unlike his mother, my grandson's grief was raw and real, his face blotchy from genuine tears. I kept my arm around him, offering tissues and quiet comfort as he stared at the casket containing his father. "Is Daddy really in there?" he whispered during a lull in the service. "His body is," I explained gently, "but the special part that made him Daddy, his love, his thoughts, his spirit, that's still with you, always." Lucas nodded, seeming to understand this distinction better than many adults. "I can still feel him sometimes, like he's watching." "I believe he is," I said, fighting back fresh tears. Sophia leaned across me. "Lucas, sit up straight. People are watching." I felt his small shoulders stiffen under my arm. This concern with appearances, rather than her son's emotional state, was precisely why James had been increasingly leaving Lucas in my care over the past year. After the service, the procession of mourners offering condolences seemed endless. James had been well loved, by colleagues at his law firm, by clients he had helped, by neighbors and friends. Each person had a story about his kindness, his integrity, his subtle humor. "Your son helped me keep my house during my divorce," one woman told me, clasping my hands. "He reduced his fees when he learned I was struggling, then connected me with financial advisors who helped me get back on my feet. James was the only attorney who took my discrimination case when no one else would," an elderly gentleman said. "He cared about justice, not just billable hours." These testimonials were bittersweet balm to my aching heart. My son had lived his values, had made a difference. I stored each story carefully in my memory, knowing Lucas would treasure them someday. Throughout the reception, I noticed Sophia having intense whispered conversations with several people, including a tall, expensively dressed man I didn't recognize. When I approached, they separated smoothly, Sophia introducing him as Richard Harlow, one of James's real estate investment partners. "My condolences, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his handshake brief and impersonal. James was a remarkable man. Something in his tone rang false, and the way Sophia's hand briefly touched his arm suggested a familiarity beyond business acquaintance. I filed this observation away, my professor's brain automatically cataloging behavioral details even through my grief. By evening's end, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Lucas had fallen asleep on a couch in the funeral home's private room, emotionally spent. As I arranged his suit jacket over him like a blanket, Thomas Bennett, James's attorney, approached quietly. "Eleanor, could we speak privately for a moment?" I followed him to a secluded corner, away from lingering mourners. "James left explicit instructions about certain matters," Thomas said, keeping his voice low. "I can't go into details yet, but he asked me to tell you one thing immediately. Trust your instincts about Lucas. Does that make sense to you?" I glanced toward my sleeping grandson, then at Sophia, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror while nodding absently at condolences. "Yes," I said slowly. "I believe it does." "Good. We'll need to meet officially tomorrow about the will. But James wanted you to know that." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Arrangements have been made. For both of you." Before I could ask more questions, Sophia approached, her social smile firmly in place. "Thomas, I hope we can resolve everything quickly," she said. "I'm thinking of taking Lucas away for a while after this. A healing trip. Probably best to handle the estate matters promptly." "Of course," Thomas replied neutrally. "My office, tomorrow at 2. As we prepared to leave, I gathered Lucas into my arms, his slight weight a precious burden. Sophia made no move to help, instead scrolling through her phone. 17 missed calls, she sighed. So many arrangements to make. I studied her composed face, noting the absence of grief's telltale signs. No swollen eyes, no exhaustion of spirit, none of the physical manifestations of heartbreak that were currently crushing me from within. "What arrangements?" I asked, carefully keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. "Life goes on, Eleanor," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Bills, accounts, notifications. James handled everything. Now it's all on me. Not us. Not, we'll figure it out together for Lucas." The solitary me spoke volumes. As I settled Lucas into my car, Sophia had asked if I would keep him overnight to give her space to process. I felt a strange sense of foreboding mixed with something else, something that felt almost like my son's presence, urging me to stay vigilant, to watch carefully, to protect what he could no longer protect himself. "We're going to be okay, Lucas," I whispered to my sleeping grandson. Somehow, we're going to be okay. I didn't yet know how prophetic or how challenging that promise would prove to be. The funeral reveals striking contrasts between Sophia's calculated performance and Lucas's genuine grief. As I observe my daughter-in-law's suspicious behavior, a cryptic message from James's attorney suggests my son anticipated trouble. What arrangements did James make before his death? And what is Sophia already planning while we're still saying goodbye? James left everything to me? Sophia's perfect composure slipped for the first time as she sat in Thomas Bennett's office the day after the funeral. I watched her face cycle through emotions, first smug satisfaction, then confusion, and finally, thinly veiled outrage as Thomas continued reading the will's provisions. "Not exactly," Thomas corrected, his professional tone unchanged. "Mr. Reynolds left you the lake house property, his investment portfolio with Meridian Partners, and a life insurance policy of $500,000. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, as Thomas outlined the inheritance that had left Sophia increasingly agitated. While substantial by most standards, nearly $1 million in total, it clearly fell short of her expectations. The family home at 1742 Oakwood Drive, both vehicles, and his personal bank account at First National are bequeathed to his mother, Eleanor Reynolds, Thomas continued, not meeting either of our eyes as he read directly from the document. "That's impossible," Sophia interrupted, her carefully manicured nails digging into the leather armrests. "We purchased that house together. It's our marital property." Thomas slid a document across the desk. "The house was purchased solely in James's name before your marriage. It was never converted to joint property. The deed and mortgage documents confirm this." I kept my expression neutral despite my own shock. James had never mentioned any of these arrangements to me. The family home, a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms and a backyard where Lucas had his treehouse, was apparently mine, not Sophia's. So were James's Mercedes sedan and Range Rover, along with a bank account I hadn't known existed. What about Lucas's college fund? Sophia demanded, her voice rising slightly. James always said he was setting aside money for Lucas's education. Thomas nodded. Mr. Reynolds established a trust for Lucas's educational expenses. You are not the trustee of this account. Then who is? Sophia's question came out as nearly a hiss. Thomas glanced at me briefly. Eleanor has been named trustee of all funds related to Lucas's care and education. The room fell silent as Sophia processed this information. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, totaling assets, weighing options, formulating responses. This makes no sense, she finally said, her voice deliberately modulated to convey wounded confusion rather than the anger I could see simmering beneath. James and I discussed our estate plans. This is nothing like what we agreed upon. Thomas cleared his throat. The will was updated 3 months ago. James came to me specifically to make these changes. Everything is legally executed and witnessed. 3 months ago? Sophia's eyes narrowed. He never mentioned any changes to me. That was his prerogative, Thomas replied simply. I remained silent, absorbing the implications of what I was hearing. 3 months ago, James had secretly revised his will to ensure I would have the family home and financial resources while limiting Sophia's access to certain assets. The timing corresponded with a period when James had seemed particularly troubled, often bringing Lucas to stay with me for father-son weekends that I suspected were actually meant to give James space to deal with marital issues. There must be some mistake, Sophia said, turning to me with a practiced look of appeal. Eleanor, you know James would have wanted his family to remain in their home. You have your own house. Surely you don't intend to take ours away from Lucas. The subtle manipulation was impressive, framing any enforcement of James's wishes as me taking something from my grandson rather than from her. I recognized the tactic, but chose not to confront it directly. I'm as surprised as you are, Sophia, I said truthfully. I need time to process all of this. Thomas continued with additional details. Items about personal effects, specific bequests to charities, funeral expenses that had been prearranged. Throughout it all, I noticed Sophia texting under the table, her face a mask of appropriate grief, occasionally disrupted by flashes of calculation. When the meeting concluded, Thomas asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once Sophia had left, with a tight-lipped promise to talk soon directed at me, he closed his office door and sat across from me. There's more, he said quietly. James left this for you, with instructions to give it to you privately after the initial reading. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my son's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. Should I gestured to the envelope. Take it home, Thomas advised. Read it when you're alone and ready. And Eleanor, he added, his professional demeanor softening. James knew exactly what he was doing. Trust that. I nodded, slipping the envelope into my purse as I rose to leave. In the lobby, I found Sophia engaged in an intense phone conversation, her back turned to the receptionist's desk. I paused, out of sight, but within earshot. Completely blindsided me, she was saying, her voice low but furious. The house, the cars, even access to Lucas's education fund. No, I don't think he suspected anything. Must have been his mother's influence. Of course I'm going to fight it, Richard. I've put in 10 years with this family. I deserve more than some vacation property and insurance money. I retreated silently, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator where Sophia might see me. My mind was racing with questions, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. James had anticipated something I was only beginning to understand. Back in my own modest home, with Lucas still at school, I finally opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page of stationery from James's law office. Mom, if you're reading this, the unthinkable has happened. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but there's no one I trust more. My marriage has been failing for some time. What began as growing apart has evolved into something more concerning. I've discovered things about Sophia that make me fear for Lucas's future emotional well-being and for your security. I've arranged things to protect you both. The house, cars, and money aren't really for you. They're tools to ensure Lucas has one stable, loving parent figure when I'm gone. Sophia will fight this. She'll try to manipulate you. Don't let her know what you know or suspect. Watch and wait. Document everything regarding Lucas's care. Thomas has the rest of my instructions and evidence I've gathered. He'll help when the time is right. I love you, Mom. You taught me to see people clearly and to plan ahead. I'm counting on those same qualities now to protect my son. James. I pressed the letter to my chest, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. Even facing his own mortality, James had been thinking of protecting his son and me. Now I understood my mission clearly. For my son's sake, for Lucas's future, I would need to become something I'd never been before. A strategic opponent in what was clearly going to become a battle of wills and manipulation with Sophia. It was time to put my psychology background to its most important use yet. James's will reveals shocking arrangements that leave Sophia furious and me stunned. Why did my son secretly transfer so many assets to my name? His private letter confirms my worst suspicions about Sophia and gives me a sacred mission. Protect Lucas at all costs, but to outsmart my calculating daughter-in-law, I'll need to hide what I know and play a longer game than she expects. Grandma, when is Dad coming back? Lucas's innocent question over breakfast 3 days after the funeral pierced my heart. At 8 years old, he was old enough to understand death conceptually, but still young enough to hope for impossible miracles. Oh, sweetheart, I said gently, setting down my coffee cup and taking his small hand in mine. Remember what we talked about? Daddy can't come back. His body stopped working because of the aneurysm in his brain. Lucas nodded, eyes downcast. I know, but sometimes I forget when I first wake up. I keep thinking he'll come make pancakes like on Saturdays. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I know it's hard. I miss him too, every minute. Would you like me to make pancakes on Saturdays now? They wouldn't be the same, he mumbled, then quickly added, but I'd like that anyway. I was staying at James's house, my house now, according to the will, to help care for Lucas while Sophia dealt with important paperwork, as she'd vaguely explained. In reality, I suspected she was meeting with her own attorney to contest James's will, but I kept this thought to myself. After dropping Lucas at school, where his teacher had been wonderfully supportive, I returned to the house to find Sophia waiting in the kitchen. She'd let herself in with her key, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that conveyed businesslike mourning. Eleanor, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't reach her eyes. I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about arrangements going forward. Of course, I replied, maintaining the polite, somewhat deferential demeanor I'd decided to adopt as my strategy. Would you like some coffee? Please. She seated herself at the kitchen island, watching as I moved around what was technically now my kitchen. This is all so overwhelming. The paperwork, the accounts, the decisions. I can only imagine, I murmured sympathetically, playing my role while remembering the angry phone conversation I'd overheard. How can I help? Sophia's perfectly made-up face registered brief surprise at my accommodating tone, quickly replaced by calculated warmth. You're so kind, Eleanor. Actually, I've been thinking about what makes the most sense for everyone, especially Lucas. Here it comes, I thought, keeping my expression open and receptive. This house has so many memories of James, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced tremor. Every room reminds Lucas of what he's lost. It might be healthier for him, for both of us, to make a fresh start somewhere else. I nodded thoughtfully while placing a mug of coffee before her. You're considering moving? I've found a lovely condo downtown, near the cultural district. Excellent schools nearby, walking distance to the art museum and library. She stirred her coffee deliberately. The thing is, Eleanor, with the way James arranged things, I'll need your cooperation. Oh? I tilted my head questioningly, as if I hadn't already anticipated this conversation. The will situation is obviously some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. James would never have intentionally put me in such a difficult position. Her tone hardened slightly before she caught herself. I've spoken with an attorney who suggests we could avoid lengthy legal proceedings if you'd simply transfer the house to me, as James would have wanted. I widened my eyes, projecting thoughtful consideration rather than the indignation I felt at her attempt to manipulate me using my son's supposed wishes. I see, I said slowly. And what does your attorney say about the fact that James updated his will only 3 months ago, specifically to make these arrangements? A flash of irritation crossed her face before her mask of reasonable grief returned. James wasn't himself in recent months. He was working too hard, stressed about cases. He wasn't thinking clearly about our family's best interests. I nodded, as if considering this explanation. That must have been difficult for you both. It was, she sighed dramatically, which is why I believe he would want us to correct this oversight now. For Lucas's sake. The invocation of Lucas's welfare, her trump card, was deployed exactly as I'd expected. I took a deliberate sip of coffee, giving myself time to formulate my response. I understand your concern, I said finally, but making hasty decisions during grief isn't wise. Perhaps we should give ourselves some time to adjust before making major changes? Sophia's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. Of course, you need time, but the condo I've found won't be available for long. It would be so much easier for Lucas if we could settle things quickly and let him start healing in a new environment. I recognized the sales tactic, creating artificial urgency to force a quick decision. My years teaching negotiation strategies to psychology students hadn't been wasted. Why don't we ask Lucas how he feels about moving? I suggested mildly. He might find comfort in staying in the home where he has so many memories of his father. Children don't always know what's best for them, Sophia countered smoothly. That's why adults make these decisions. Besides, he's already dealing with enough emotional turmoil. I noted how skillfully she'd positioned herself as the protective parent while subtly suggesting I would harm Lucas by consulting him about his own feelings. James's letter rustled in my memory. She'll try to manipulate you. You're probably right, I conceded, watching relief flash across her features. Let me think about it all for a few days. This has been such a shock. Of course, she agreed, clearly believing she'd made progress. Take the weekend. But Eleanor, she added, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, I'm worried about finances with the way things stand. James handled everything, and now I'm finding credit card bills, the mortgage that was now my responsibility, according to the will. But I kept this observation to myself. I'd be happy to help review the household accounts, I offered, seizing the opportunity. Perhaps we could go through everything together? That's not necessary, she said quickly. I just meant that resolving the house situation would help me access the equity we've built for Lucas's education and well-being, the education fund that James had specifically placed under my control as trustee. I wondered if she realized how transparent her motivations were to someone trained to observe human behavior. Let's talk more next week, I suggested, rising as if our conversation had reassured rather than alarmed me. I should get some rest before picking up Lucas from school. After Sophia left, I sat alone in the quiet house, mentally reviewing our interaction. She clearly believed I was a grief-stricken, somewhat passive older woman who could be maneuvered into surrendering what James had entrusted to me. For now, I needed her to continue believing exactly that. I picked up my phone and called Thomas Bennett. I need to understand exactly what evidence James collected, I told him without preamble, and how we can gather more. This is going to be a longer game than I anticipated. Sophia wastes no time trying to manipulate me into signing over the house, using Lucas's welfare as emotional leverage. Playing the role of a compliant, grief-addled mother-in-law, I appear to consider her proposal while secretly planning my counteroffensive. James warned me she would fight dirty, but he didn't know his mother was ready to fight smarter. The performance has begun, and I intend to be the better actor in this dangerous production. Grandma, Mom says I have to go with her to Miami next weekend, but I don't want to. Lucas's troubled face looked up at me as I tucked him into bed, 1 week after James's funeral. This was the first I'd heard of any Miami trip, which immediately raised red flags. Miami? I kept my voice casual while my mind raced. That sounds like an adventure. Lucas shook his head, clutching his stuffed dinosaur tighter. She says her friend Richard has a boat and we'll stay at a fancy hotel. But I have my science project due Monday, and Dad always helped with my projects. I smoothed his hair gently. Have you told your mom about the science project? She said I can skip it, that teachers understand when your dad dies. His voice caught on the word. But Dad wouldn't want me to skip it. He always said commitments are important. Your father was right about that, I agreed, making a mental note of this conversation. Let me talk to your mom tomorrow. Maybe we can work something out. After Lucas fell asleep, I called Thomas Bennett at his home number, which he'd provided for urgent matters. Miami? Thomas's voice sharpened when I explained the situation. With Richard Harlow? You know him? I asked, surprised. He's the real estate developer I mentioned in our meeting yesterday, the one James had concerns about. Thomas's tone was carefully measured. Eleanor, did you install the home monitoring system I recommended? Yes. The technician finished today. Cameras in the common areas and the security system that sends alerts to my phone. I'd followed Thomas's advice to improve home security, though the underlying purpose was different than what a grieving family might normally install. Good. That recording capability may prove valuable. He paused. I'm sending you some materials from James's private file tomorrow by courier. Don't open the package where anyone might see you. The next morning, after taking Lucas to school, I received a sealed manila envelope. Inside were printouts of text messages between Sophia and someone saved in her phone as RH, dated from various points over the past 8 months. James had apparently gained access to her phone records through means I chose not to question, given his legal background. The messages painted a damning picture. An affair that had begun almost a year ago. Plans made and broken. Complaints about James working late, about being trapped in her marriage. References to Lucas as the complication in their relationship plans. Most disturbing were exchanges from just 2 months ago. RH, how long are we going to keep this limbo going? You said you were ready to leave. Sophia, patience. Jay's name is on everything important. Need to get financials in better position first. Working on it. ERH. The Cayman property isn't going to wait forever. Perfect opportunity for fresh start. Sophia, trust me. Few more months, max. Everything will fall into place. I sat back, hands shaking slightly. These weren't just messages documenting an affair. They revealed Sophia had been planning to leave James, but wanted to secure financial assets first. Had James discovered these messages and changed his will in response? Is that why Sophia had been so shocked by the provisions? Another document in the package was a private investigator's report James had commissioned, containing photographs of Sophia and Richard Harlow entering a hotel together, expense reports showing gifts he'd purchased for her, and background information on Harlow's business dealings, some of which appeared ethically questionable. The final item was a handwritten note from James to Thomas, dated just 3 weeks before his death. Tom, enclosed is everything I've gathered. Not sure what my next steps should be. Confronting her could jeopardize my access to Lucas if things go badly. Need to protect him above all. We'll meet you next Thursday to discuss options. James had died on Tuesday. The meeting never happened. Armed with this knowledge, I approached my conversation with Sophia about the Miami trip strategically. I waited until she came to pick up Lucas's weekend bag that Friday afternoon. Lucas mentioned you're planning a trip to Miami? I kept my tone light, curious rather than confrontational. Just a quick weekend getaway, Sophia replied, checking her designer watch. Good for him to have a distraction. He's worried about missing his science project deadline, I mentioned casually. You know how James always emphasized academics. Sophia's smile tightened. A weekend off won't hurt his GPA, Eleanor. The school psychologist actually recommended new experiences to process grief. I nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Though I wonder if a boat trip with Richard, was it? Might be a bit much so soon after losing his father. Lucas seems anxious about it. Her eyes narrowed slightly at my mention of Richard's name. Lucas will be fine. Children are adaptable. They certainly are, I agreed. Though sometimes they need familiar routines during trauma. I'd be happy to keep him here to finish his project, if that would help your plans. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing the freedom of a child-free weekend against her need to maintain the appearance of devoted motherhood. That's thoughtful, but unnecessary, she said finally. This trip is about mother-son bonding. Of course, I conceded, then added innocently, Oh, I've been meaning to ask, do you know the password to James's home computer? Lucas was hoping to find some photos for a memory book his counselor suggested. I don't keep track of James's passwords, she said dismissively. Have Thomas check his office files. Another note for my growing mental catalog. Sophia claimed not to know James's passwords, information that most spouses would share. I'd already found his password notebook in his desk drawer, but her response was telling. One more thing, I said as she turned to leave. Lucas's teacher wants parent volunteers for their field trip to the Science Museum next Wednesday. Since I'm not officially a parent, I thought you might want to sign up. The children who've lost parents apparently find these outings especially difficult. It was a test, one I suspected she would fail. Wednesday, I have an all-day spa appointment I've been waiting weeks for. Mental health care, she added with a performative sigh. You understand. Of course, I said sympathetically. Self-care is important during grief. I'll explain to Lucas's teacher. After she left with a promise to return Sunday evening with Lucas, I immediately called Thomas. She's taking Lucas to Miami with Richard Harlow, I reported. I need to document this trip carefully. Already on it, Thomas assured me. I've engaged the same investigator James used. We'll have photographs of everything. Miami is actually helpful for our purposes. It shows her priorities clearly. And if Lucas is upset by the trip, I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Document his emotional state when he returns. Have him talk to his counselor about it. Every reaction becomes evidence, Eleanor. I hated viewing my grandson's pain as evidence, but I understood the necessity. Building a case for Lucas's well-being meant carefully cataloging everything that threatened it. As I prepared for a weekend alone in James's house, my house, I thought about the theater production unfolding around us all. Sophia playing the grieving widow while planning escapes with her lover. Me playing the supportive mother-in-law while gathering ammunition. Even Lucas unconsciously providing crucial insights through his innocent comments and reactions. The only person not performing was James, whose absence remained the most powerful presence in our lives. I touched the framed photo of him on the mantel. "I'm watching, James," I whispered, "just like you asked me to, and I'm learning more than Sophia realizes." Disturbing evidence reveals Sophia has been planning her escape for months, viewing Lucas as a complication in her affair with Richard Harlow. As she whisks my grandson off to Miami with her lover, I maintain my performance as the supportive mother-in-law while carefully documenting every poor parenting decision. James had begun building a case before his death. Now I'm continuing his work, gathering evidence that will eventually protect Lucas from a mother who sees him as an afterthought in her new life plans. Lucas returned from Miami with sunburned shoulders, a stomach ache from too much ice cream, and emotional withdrawal that broke my heart. He trudged into the house Sunday evening, hours later than Sophia had promised to bring him back, his small face tight with exhaustion. "How was your trip, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling to his level as Sophia texted rapidly on her phone behind him. Lucas shrugged, eyes downcast. "The boat made me sick." "He's being dramatic," Sophia interjected without looking up from her screen. "It was just a little motion sickness. The resort was 5-star. The weather was perfect. He had a wonderful time." Lucas's expression told a different story, but he remained silent, casting a quick glance at his mother before mumbling, "Can I go to my room?" "Of course," I said gently. "I'll bring up some ginger tea for your tummy in a few minutes." As he trudged upstairs, I noticed he wasn't carrying his backpack. Did Lucas forget his school bag? Sophia waved dismissively. "It got wet on the boat, nothing important in it. His science project materials were in that bag," I pointed out, carefully keeping accusation from my tone. "He can get an extension. I'll write a note." She finally looked up from her phone, her expression daring me to challenge her. "Richard sends his regards, by the way. He was disappointed you couldn't join us." The brazen mention of her lover made my stomach clench, but I maintained my facade of oblivious politeness. "How thoughtful. I hope you enjoyed your weekend." "Very much," she replied, a hint of triumph in her smile. "Richard has wonderful connections in Miami. We're considering investment opportunities there." "How nice," I murmured, making a mental note of this casual admission of future plans. I should check on Lucas. Upstairs, I found my grandson sitting on his bed, staring at a photo of James on his nightstand. The room was exactly as he'd left it Friday, homework still spread across his desk, work he clearly hadn't touched all weekend. "Want to tell me about the trip?" I asked gently, sitting beside him. His lower lip trembled. Mom was on her phone the whole time. She and Richard talked about boring grown-up stuff and left me with the hotel babysitter, even at night. My heart sank. "The whole night?" He nodded miserably. "2 nights. The babysitter fell asleep watching TV, and I got scared because I didn't know where I was when I woke up. I called Mom's room, but she didn't answer." I kept my expression neutral while inwardly seething. That must have been frightening. Richard has a big boat, but he wouldn't let me touch anything. He said kids mess things up. Lucas picked at a loose thread on his comforter. And Mom laughed when he said that, even though Dad always let me help steer our little boat. Each detail was another piece of evidence, another example of Sophia prioritizing her new relationship over her son's emotional needs. I made careful mental notes to record later in the journal Thomas had suggested I keep. "Did you tell Mom you were scared or upset?" I asked. Lucas shook his head. "She was having fun. She told me in the car that it's important for her to be happy again, and I shouldn't make things harder by complaining." The manipulation of making an 8-year-old responsible for his mother's happiness, especially one grieving his father, sent a surge of protective anger through me. I pushed it down, focusing instead on comforting Lucas. It's okay to have feelings about things, I told him, pulling him gently against my side. Even when grown-ups are having fun, your feelings matter too. He leaned into me, his small body relaxing slightly. Dad always asked about my feelings. I know, sweetheart. I know. After getting Lucas settled with tea for his stomach and helping him salvage what we could of his science project, I documented the evening's revelations in my journal, adding them to the growing catalog of concerning behaviors. Thomas had explained that establishing patterns was crucial. Any single incident could be explained away, but consistent patterns of neglect or poor judgment would build our case. Over the next 2 weeks, those patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Sophia began staying out late without explanation, leaving Lucas with me more frequently. She missed his school conference, sending me in her place with a vague excuse about estate meetings. She forgot to refill his asthma medication, necessitating an emergency pharmacy run when he had a mild attack during soccer practice. Each incident was meticulously documented in my journal. Each one showed a mother increasingly detached from her son's daily needs, while I stepped in to fill the void. I was careful not to criticize Sophia directly to Lucas, focusing instead on providing the stability and attention he craved. The security system I'd installed captured telling moments. Sophia bringing Richard to the house late one evening, both slightly intoxicated, unaware that Lucas was awake, and witnessed their intimate behavior in the kitchen. Sophia instructing Lucas to remember to tell Grandma you had a great time today, after a rushed outing where she'd spent most of the time on business calls. Multiple instances of her promising Lucas she'd attend his activities, then canceling at the last minute. My performance as the supportive, somewhat naive mother-in-law continued throughout. I offered to help with Lucas's care in ways that seemed generous rather than strategic. I expressed understanding when Sophia claimed grief brain for forgotten commitments. I avoided confrontation when she made thinly veiled comments about moving forward with selling the house. "Eleanor, we need to discuss the house situation," she said one evening, 3 weeks after James's death. She'd arrived unexpectedly while I was helping Lucas with homework, dressed for what was clearly a dinner date rather than a mother-son evening. "Of course," I replied amiably. "I've been meaning to ask what items you'd like to keep when I move in permanently next month." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. "Move in? I thought we agreed the house should be sold." "Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that," I said mildly. "Actually, I've been thinking it's best for Lucas to maintain stability right now. His therapist mentioned how important familiar environments are during grief." Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced a concerned smile. "I'm worried about you, Eleanor. This house is far too large for you to manage alone, and the financial burden of the mortgage, utilities, maintenance." "James left the house free and clear," I mentioned casually, watching her reaction. "No mortgage to worry about, and I'm more capable than I look. All those years managing a university department taught me quite a bit about handling complex responsibilities." Something shifted in her assessment of me, a recalculation that I could almost see happening behind her eyes. I'd revealed myself as slightly more formidable than she'd assumed, yet still maintained my helpful, non-threatening demeanor. "We'll discuss it more later," she said finally. "I need to run. Important dinner meeting. Lucas has already had dinner, and he should be in bed by 9. After she left, I sat with Lucas at the kitchen table, helping him rebuild the science project whose materials had been lost in Miami. As he carefully glued pieces of his solar system model together, he looked up suddenly. "Grandma, are you going to live here now instead of Mom?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, focusing intently on positioning Mars at the correct distance from his styrofoam son. "Mom told someone on the phone that you're trying to take the house from her. She said you were being selfish." I chose my words carefully. "Your dad wanted to make sure we all had safe places to live. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about the details. I want you to stay," he said simply. "You help me with homework and remember my medicine and make real food instead of just ordering pizza." His straightforward assessment of the situation, so innocent yet so perceptive, reinforced my determination. This wasn't just about following James's wishes anymore. It was about protecting a child who clearly recognized, even at 8, the difference between performative parenting and genuine care. "I'll do my very best to stay close, no matter what," I promised him. It was the only promise I could make with absolute certainty while the larger battle continued to unfold around us. The aftermath of the Miami trip reveals disturbing patterns in Sophia's parenting. As she increasingly neglects Lucas for her relationship with Richard, I carefully document each instance while maintaining my supportive facade. Lucas's innocent observations confirm what I already know. Sophia sees him as an inconvenience in her new life plans. The house becomes our first battlefield, but the war is really about something far more precious, a vulnerable boy who deserves better than a mother who remembers him only when it serves her purposes. I'm thinking of taking Lucas to my parents in Arizona for a few weeks. Sophia's announcement over morning coffee nearly 4 weeks after James's death seemed casual, but the timing set off immediate alarm bells. I had just informed her that Thomas Bennett needed to meet with us again regarding additional estate matters. Arizona? I kept my voice neutral while stirring my coffee. That's quite a distance. What about Lucas's school? Sophia waved dismissively. He can miss a few weeks. Children are resilient. James's favorite phrase, "children are resilient," sounded hollow coming from her lips, a convenient excuse rather than a thoughtful observation. When were you thinking of going? I asked, mentally calculating how this might align with the increasingly urgent timeline Thomas had mentioned. Next week, ideally. She checked her expensive watch. My parents have been begging to see him, and frankly, I could use the support system. Being a sudden single mother is overwhelming. I bit back the observation that she'd been essentially a single mother by choice for months, given how often she delegated Lucas's care to James and me even before the affair began. That's understandable, I said instead. Though I wonder if such a big trip might be difficult for Lucas right now. He's just getting back into his school routine, and his grief counselor mentioned consistency is important. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting I don't know what's best for my own son? Not at all, I backpedaled, maintaining my non-threatening persona. Just thinking out loud. I'm sure you've considered everything carefully. I have. Her tone softened, becoming almost conspiratorial. Actually, Eleanor, I wanted to discuss something important with you. Could we have dinner tonight? Just the two of us? I'll have my assistant watch Lucas. I raised an eyebrow. Your assistant? Richard's assistant, she corrected smoothly. Melissa is wonderful with children. She's helped with Lucas before. Another detail for my journal. Sophia was leaving Lucas with her lover's assistant, rather than his grandmother who lived 15 minutes away. I made a mental note to ask Lucas about these previous occasions. I'd be happy to watch him, I offered. But dinner sounds lovely. What did you want to discuss? Everything, she said vaguely. The house, Lucas's future, how we move forward from here. I think I've come up with a solution that works for everyone. Her confident smile suggested she believed she'd formulated an irresistible proposal. I agreed to meet at an upscale restaurant downtown at 7, curious what strategy she'd devised. The restaurant she'd chosen was deliberately impressive, the kind with minimalist decor, tiny portions, and prices that made you wince. Sophia was already seated when I arrived, looking elegant in a designer dress that somehow managed to suggest tasteful mourning while remaining fashionable. Eleanor, thank you for coming, she greeted me, air-kissing my cheek. I ordered us a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. James always said it was your favorite. It wasn't. James knew perfectly well I preferred a simple Chardonnay, but the manufactured intimacy was part of her performance. How thoughtful, I murmured, settling into my chair. Though I rarely indulged even before James's passing. She poured champagne anyway, raising her glass in a toast, to new beginnings and solutions. I sipped politely, waiting as she established the atmosphere she wanted. Convivial, generous, warmly intimate. The manipulation was textbook. Create a pleasing environment, establish rapport, suggest shared understanding before making your pitch. Eleanor, she began after our appetizers arrived, these past weeks have been so difficult for all of us, losing James, trying to help Lucas cope, dealing with all the practical matters. I nodded encouragingly, playing my role. I've been thinking about what truly matters, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity. Family, security, peace of mind, and I think I've found a way for all of us to have what we need. I'm listening, I said, cutting a small piece of my overpriced scallop. You and I both know James's will has created complications. She delicately sipped her champagne. The house, the vehicles, the accounts. It's all rather awkward, isn't it? Not at all what James would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly. I remained silent, letting her continue her pitch uninterrupted. I've spoken with an excellent estate attorney who specializes in these situations. He believes we could easily contest the will based on James's mental state in those final months. The stress he was under, the medications for his previous heart condition. It wouldn't be difficult to demonstrate diminished capacity. My heart clenched at how casually she suggested invalidating my son's final wishes, but I kept my expression neutral. I see. But litigation is so unpleasant, she continued smoothly. Creates divisions, drags on for months or even years. Not what Lucas needs right now. Absolutely not, I agreed, wondering where this performance was heading. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. So, I've come up with a better solution. One that gives us both what we want without any messy legal battles. And what would that be? I asked, genuinely curious about her strategy. You transfer the house and vehicles back to me as James's widow, she explained, as if offering a tremendous favor. In exchange, I'll guarantee you can see Lucas regularly, perhaps every other weekend, major holidays. I'll even put it in writing. The breathtaking audacity of her offer, essentially ransoming my own grandson, almost made me lose my carefully maintained composure. She was proposing I surrender everything James had legally left me in exchange for permission to see Lucas, rights I already had as his grandmother. That's quite a proposition, I managed, taking another sip of champagne to hide my reaction. I know, it's so generous, she agreed, misinterpreting my hesitation as consideration. Most women in my position would fight for everything, but I value your relationship with Lucas, and frankly, I could use the help occasionally. Occasionally? I echoed, picking up on the telling word choice. Well, single motherhood is demanding, she sighed dramatically, and I do have my career to consider. Plus, Richard and I, she stopped herself, recalibrating. That is, I'll eventually want to rebuild my personal life. Having guaranteed childcare arrangements would be tremendously helpful. There it was, the real motivation. Not Lucas's well-being, but convenient childcare arrangements that would allow her to pursue her relationship with Richard unencumbered. What about Lucas's trust fund? I asked innocently. Would that remain as James arranged it? A flash of irritation crossed her features before she smiled again. That's unnecessarily complicated too. As his mother, I should have control over his educational expenses. Children's needs change, require flexibility. They certainly do, I agreed, thinking of all the ways Lucas's needs had been ignored in recent weeks. So, she said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a folded document, I took the liberty of having my attorney draft a simple agreement. You transfer the assets back where they belong. I guarantee your visitation rights. Clean, simple, everyone wins. She slid the paper across the table with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. I took it, scanning the language that would effectively undo everything James had arranged to protect Lucas and me. This is quite thorough, I commented, buying time while formulating my response. And what about Arizona? Would Lucas and I still have our visits if you move? About that, she said, her expression turning regretful. The Arizona trip might become more permanent. Richard has development opportunities there. Excellent private schools for Lucas. It would be a fresh start for everyone, and conveniently far from me and anyone else who knew James or might question her parenting. The pieces of her plan were falling perfectly into place in my understanding. I'll need to think about this, I said, folding the document and placing it in my own purse, and perhaps have Thomas review it, since he's familiar with James's wishes. Her smile tightened. I wouldn't involve Thomas. He's rather old-fashioned about these matters. My attorney assures me this is completely standard. I nodded thoughtfully. Even so, such an important decision deserves careful consideration. James always taught me not to sign anything without proper review. She couldn't argue with invoking James's advice without seeming disrespectful, so she merely smiled and signaled for the check. Of course. Take a few days. But Eleanor, she added, her voice taking on a subtle edge, this really is the best solution for everyone. Fighting me on this would only hurt Lucas in the long run. The thinly veiled threat hung between us as she paid for our expensive meal with what I suspected was James's credit card. I maintained my mask of thoughtful consideration, thanking her for dinner and promising to give her proposal the attention it deserves. As I drove home, my hands finally allowed themselves to shake on the steering wheel. The audacity, the manipulation, the casual way she planned to separate Lucas from his remaining connections to James, it all confirmed what I'd been documenting for weeks. I called Thomas from my car. "She's planning to take Lucas to Arizona permanently," I said without preamble. "And she's offered me a devil's bargain to get the house and accounts." "Perfect," Thomas replied, surprising me. "This is exactly what we needed. Bring the document to my office first thing tomorrow. It's time to move to the next phase." Over an expensive dinner, Sophia reveals her true colors, offering me a devil's bargain. Surrender everything James left me in exchange for permission to see my own grandson. Her plan to move Lucas to Arizona with her lover shows how completely she intends to erase James from their lives. Little does she know, her transparent manipulation has handed us exactly the evidence we need. Thomas's cryptic response suggests the game is about to change, and Sophia has no idea what's coming. "She actually put it in writing. I can hardly believe it." Thomas Bennett shook his head in amazement as he reviewed the document Sophia had given me. We sat in his office early the next morning, coffee growing cold as we dissected her proposition. "This is essentially a confession," he continued, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. "She's explicitly stating she'll allow you to see Lucas only if you transfer assets to her that are legally yours. That's textbook coercion. And this part about Arizona?" I pointed to the clause mentioning reasonable visitation regardless of primary residence location. "Establishes premeditation for removing Lucas from his support system and familiar environment during grief." Thomas added another yellow highlight. "Combined with the evidence we've gathered of her parenting patterns, this creates a compelling narrative." I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. "So what happens now?" Thomas set down his marker, expression turning serious. "It's time to execute the contingency plan James put in place. He hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but he prepared for this exact scenario." From his desk drawer, Thomas withdrew a sealed envelope marked Emergency Protocol in James's handwriting. My heart constricted at the sight of my son's familiar script. James left detailed instructions about when and how to proceed if Sophia's behavior threatened Lucas's well-being or attempted to separate him from you. Thomas opened the envelope carefully. "The key component is a petition for emergency custody modification." "Custody modification?" I repeated, stunned. "James wanted me to seek custody of Lucas?" "Temporary custody initially," Thomas clarified, "based on documented evidence of parental neglect and the child's best interests during grief. James believed, and I concur, that a judge would likely award you temporary guardianship while a more permanent arrangement is determined." My hands trembled slightly. The responsibility James had entrusted to me was enormous, not just documenting Sophia's behavior, but potentially taking over Lucas's primary care. "I'm 65, Thomas. Would a court really consider me as a guardian over Lucas's mother?" "Age isn't disqualifying, especially given your demonstrated involvement in his life. And remember, we're not alleging Sophia is an unfit mother in the traditional sense. We're demonstrating that her current priorities and choices are detrimental to Lucas's emotional well-being during a critical period of grief and adjustment." Thomas laid out the evidence we'd accumulated, my detailed journal documenting Sophia's absences and Lucas's reactions, the home security footage showing multiple concerning incidents, statements from Lucas's teachers about missed conferences and incomplete homework, notes from his grief counselor about regression and anxiety that coincided with Sophia's increased absences, photographic evidence of the Miami trip with Richard while Lucas was left with hotel staff, and now the damning document, proposing to use Lucas as leverage. "We'll need one more piece," Thomas explained. "A neutral third-party evaluation of Lucas's home environment and emotional state. I've arranged for a court-approved child psychologist to interview Lucas tomorrow at his school. Standard procedure in these cases, nothing that would alarm Sophia if she heard about it." The methodical way James had prepared for this contingency, right down to identifying appropriate psychological evaluators, broke my heart all over again. How long had he been concerned about Sophia's parenting? How much had he witnessed before deciding such drastic measures might be necessary? "When would we file the petition?" I asked, trying to focus on practical matters rather than my swirling emotions. "Immediately after receiving the psychologist's report, assuming it supports our position, likely within 48 hours. Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Eleanor, Are you prepared for what comes next? Sophia will not take this lying down. She'll be furious, possibly vindictive. I thought of Lucas's small face when he returned from Miami, the way he'd confided that his mother had left him with strangers overnight, how he'd clutched his father's photo while trying not to cry. I thought of James, who had foreseen this situation and trusted me to protect his son when he no longer could. I'm prepared, I said firmly. What's our next step? Maintain your current approach with Sophia. Don't let on that anything has changed. If she presses for an answer about her proposition, tell her you're still considering it and have questions about some details. Thomas began organizing documents into a legal folder. Meanwhile, I'll prepare the emergency petition and coordinate with the psychologist. As I left Thomas's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Need your answer by tomorrow. Arizona arrangements pending. Important opportunity for Lucas's future. The transparent attempt to create artificial urgency only strengthened my resolve. I typed a carefully calibrated response. Still reviewing. Have some questions about the visitation schedule. Can we discuss tomorrow evening? Her reply came immediately. Fine. 7 p.m. at the house. We'll have Richard's attorney present to answer any concerns. Richard's attorney, not James's, not a neutral party, not even her own independent counsel. Another telling detail for our documentation. I spent the afternoon with Lucas after school, helping with homework and listening as he reluctantly described an incident that morning when Sophia had forgotten to pack his lunch, then berated him for calling to remind her because she was in an important meeting. I recorded these details in my journal immediately after he went upstairs to play, noting his dejected posture and the way he'd minimized his mother's reaction, clearly accustomed to managing her emotions rather than his own. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Thomas. The school psychologist met with Lucas today during lunch, he informed me without preamble. Her preliminary findings are significant. Lucas demonstrated elevated anxiety when discussing his home environment, particular concern about being sent away to Arizona, and clear attachment to you as his primary source of emotional support. Is that enough? I asked, hope rising cautiously. Combined with our other evidence, yes. I'm filing the emergency petition first thing tomorrow morning. The judge I've requested typically rules on these matters within 24 hours. Should I tell Lucas anything? I worried about preparing him for the potential upheaval. Not yet, Thomas advised. Children his age struggle with keeping sensitive information private. For now, maintain normal routines. If the judge rules in our favor, we'll have a child specialist help explain the situation to him appropriately. I slept fitfully that night, torn between hope that Lucas might be protected from Sophia's neglect and anxiety about the conflict that would inevitably erupt. By morning, my resolve had strengthened. This wasn't about my preferences or even about honoring James's wishes anymore. It was about a vulnerable child whose mother was making choices that compounded rather than helped his grief. Thomas called at 10:17 a.m. The petition has been filed. Judge Carlton has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Sophia will be served notice this afternoon. So soon. I hadn't expected things to move so quickly. Judge Carlton takes child welfare cases seriously, especially when there's evidence of potential parental flight risk. Sophia's Arizona plans raised red flags. I thought about my scheduled 7 p.m. meeting with Sophia and Richard's attorney that evening. Should I still meet with Sophia tonight as planned? Absolutely not, Thomas said firmly. Once she's served the court papers, you should have no direct contact except through legal representatives. Go to a hotel tonight if necessary. She'll likely be extremely volatile when she realizes what's happening. What about Lucas? Worry for my grandson overrode all other concerns. The petition includes a provision for Lucas to remain in his current home environment with you present until the hearing. The server will explain that to Sophia. Thomas paused. Eleanor, this is going to get complicated quickly. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared? I thought of James's letter, of his trust in me, of Lucas's increasingly anxious behavior. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Sophia's manipulative proposition becomes the final evidence we need, triggering James's emergency protocol, a custody petition I never imagined filing. As court proceedings are set in motion, I prepare for the storm that will erupt when Sophia discovers her plans are being challenged. Thomas warns me the battle will be fierce, but my resolve is unshakable. For James, for Lucas, I'll face whatever comes next, even as I wonder how my grieving grandson will weather this additional upheaval in his young life. You scheming, manipulative witch! Sophia's voice exploded through my phone hours after she'd been served with the emergency custody petition. I held the device away from my ear, her rage so incandescent it seemed to radiate through the speaker. How dare you try to steal my son after everything I've done for you? Her words tumbled out in furious bursts. My attorneys will destroy you. You'll never see Lucas again when this is over. Following Thomas's advice, I remained silent, letting her fury spend itself without engagement. Eventually, she seemed to register my lack of response. Are you there? Say something, she demanded. On the advice of counsel, I can't discuss this matter directly with you, I finally replied, keeping my voice calm and neutral. I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow. You'll regret this, she hissed before the line went dead. I leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly exhausted. The court server had arrived at precisely 2 p.m., delivering the petition papers to Sophia at her office. Thomas had arranged for Lucas to be with me after school, sparing him from witnessing his mother's inevitable explosion. Now, as evening approached, I faced the challenge of maintaining normalcy for Lucas while preparing for tomorrow's hearing. He sat at the dining room table, focused on a math worksheet, blissfully unaware of the legal storm gathering around him. "Grandma, can we have spaghetti for dinner?" he asked, looking up from his multiplication problems. "The kind with your special sauce." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, grateful for the distraction of ordinary tasks. "Would you like to help me make it?" As we chopped onions and stirred sauce, I studied my grandson's face, searching for signs of additional stress. Sophia had called him earlier, her voice tight but controlled, explaining that she had an unexpected work emergency and he would stay with me tonight. Lucas had accepted this explanation without question, accustomed to his mother's frequent absences. "Mom sounded mad on the phone," he observed suddenly, sprinkling cheese over his portion of spaghetti. "Is she mad at me?" "No, absolutely not," I assured him quickly. "Grown-ups sometimes get frustrated about work things. It has nothing to do with you." He nodded, seeming relieved but not entirely convinced. "She said she'd take me to get ice cream tomorrow to make up for missing our dinner, but she forgot last time she promised that." Another small piece of evidence, broken promises becoming so routine that an 8-year-old had learned to expect disappointment. I added mental notes to my documentation while maintaining an encouraging expression. "Let's enjoy our dinner tonight, and we'll see what tomorrow brings," I suggested gently. I couldn't bring myself to make promises about tomorrow when I knew how completely our lives might change after the hearing. After putting Lucas to bed with extra stories and reassurance, I called Thomas for final preparation. "How's Lucas?" he asked immediately. "Managing," I replied, unaware of what's happening, as far as I can tell. Sophia called him briefly, but kept her composure. "Good. Children are perceptive, but there's no need for him to shoulder adult concerns." Thomas's voice took on its professional tone. "For tomorrow, I've prepared a summary document of all evidence for Judge Carlton." The psychological evaluation came back strongly supportive of our position. "What should I expect at the hearing?" I asked, trying to prepare myself mentally. "Judge Carlton runs a tight courtroom. This is a preliminary emergency hearing, so testimony will be limited. You'll likely be asked about your observations of Lucas's well-being and your capacity to provide temporary care. Sophia will have opportunity to respond to the allegations. Will Lucas need to appear?" The thought of my grandson being questioned in court made my stomach clench. "No. Judge Carlton has reviewed the psychologist's report and specifically excluded Lucas from this initial hearing. If a full custody investigation proceeds, he may eventually speak with Lucas in chambers, but that would be weeks from now." I exhaled in relief. "And Richard Harlow? Will he be involved?" "Legally, no standing. Practically, he's paying for Sophia's high-powered attorney, so his influence will be present." Thomas paused. "Eleanor, prepare yourself. These hearings can get ugly. Sophia's likely strategy will be to paint you as a grief-deranged, controlling mother-in-law, trying to steal her child." "I understand," I said, though my heart raced at the thought of public accusations. "What matters is Lucas." "Exactly. Focus on that tomorrow. No matter what Sophia or her attorney claim, remember why we're doing this." Sleep proved elusive that night. I checked on Lucas repeatedly, watching his peaceful breathing and wondering how tomorrow's decision would affect the rest of his childhood. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute, dressed in a conservative navy suit that Thomas had advised would convey stability and trustworthiness to the court. "Why are you dressed up, Grandma?" Lucas asked over breakfast, eyeing my unusual formal attire. "I have an important meeting," I explained, helping him pack his backpack. "Mrs. Wilson from next door will take you to school today, and either Mom or I will pick you up this afternoon." He accepted this with the flexibility of childhood, more concerned about whether his favorite shirt was clean than about the day's unusual arrangements. I hugged him extra tight at Mrs. Wilson's door, wishing I could shield him from the uncertainty ahead. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all marble and echoing hallways. Thomas met me at the entrance, his expression professionally composed, but with worry lines visible around his eyes. "Sophia's already inside with her attorney, Gerald Winters from Mitchell and Blackwell, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the city." I nodded, unsurprised that Richard had secured top legal representation. "And our chances?" "Judge Carlton is fair but cautious. The evidence is compelling, but temporary custody removal is still an extraordinary remedy." Thomas squeezed my arm reassuringly. "Remember, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about ensuring Lucas has proper support during a critical time." Inside the courtroom, Sophia sat at a table with a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. She wore a conservative black dress, hair pulled back in a modest style that contrasted sharply with her usual fashionable appearance. The transformation into grieving, devoted widow and mother was complete, down to the framed photo of James and Lucas she'd placed prominently before her. Her eyes met mine with glacial hatred as I entered, before she quickly adjusted her expression to one of wounded confusion, leaning to whisper something to her attorney. The performance had begun. Judge Carlton, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, entered promptly at 9 a.m. Her no-nonsense demeanor suggested little patience for dramatics as she reviewed the file before her. "This is an emergency hearing regarding temporary custody modification for minor child Lucas Reynolds," she stated, looking over her reading glasses at both tables. "I've reviewed the petition and supporting documentation. Let's proceed efficiently." For the next hour, Thomas presented our case methodically. The documented patterns of neglect, Sophia's increasing absences, the Miami trip incidents, the psychological evaluation, and finally, the damning proposition document showing Sophia's attempt to use Lucas as leverage. Gerald Winters countered with equal efficiency, portraying me as an interfering mother-in-law exploiting a grieving widow's temporary struggles, suggesting my obsessive documentation demonstrated unhealthy fixation, and painting Sophia as a devoted mother temporarily overwhelmed by extraordinary circumstances. "Your Honor," Winters concluded smoothly, "Mrs. Reynolds has kept her grandson overnight precisely 17 times since her son's death. At Ms. Jensen's request, to help during this adjustment period. This doesn't demonstrate neglect. It shows a mother wisely accepting support while processing her grief. The Arizona opportunity represents a fresh start, not abandonment of support systems." When my turn came to speak directly, I focused on Lucas rather than Sophia, describing concrete examples of his anxiety, his academic struggles since James's death, and the stability I'd attempted to provide. "Your Honor," I said, meeting the judge's evaluating gaze, "I'm not seeking to replace Sophia as Lucas's mother. I'm asking for temporary measures to ensure his needs are prioritized during an exceptionally vulnerable time in his development. The evidence suggests that currently other priorities are taking precedence over those needs." Judge Carlton asked pointed questions of both sides, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, she announced she would review the evidence in chambers and return with her decision in 1 hour. The 60-minute wait in the courthouse hallway seemed eternal. Sophia and her attorney conferred in hushed tones at one end, while Thomas and I sat silently at the other. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs felt leaden as I rose to hear the decision that would determine Lucas's immediate future. Judge Carlton wasted no time on preliminaries. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find sufficient cause for emergency intervention in the current custody arrangement," she stated, her voice firm and authoritative. "Temporary guardianship of minor child Lucas Reynolds is hereby granted to Eleanor Reynolds for a period of 60 days, during which a full evaluation of the family situation will be conducted by court-appointed specialists." I exhaled shakily as she continued outlining the details, Sophia would have supervised visitation 3 times weekly. Neither party could remove Lucas from the jurisdiction, and a comprehensive family assessment would begin immediately. Across the courtroom, Sophia's composed facade cracked completely. Her face contorted with fury as she turned to her attorney, whisper-shouting accusations and demands for appeal. Judge Carlton observed this reaction with a raised eyebrow before adding a final comment. "Ms. Jensen, your reaction to this temporary ruling concerns me. I strongly advise you to use the coming evaluation period to demonstrate the mature parenting capacity your son needs, rather than focusing on personal grievances." With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded. Court adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Sophia blocked our path, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with angry tears. "This isn't over," she hissed, ignoring her attorney's restraining hand on her arm. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." Thomas stepped between us. "Ms. Jensen, all communications should go through counsel from this point. We'll coordinate Lucas's pickup from school today and arrange the first supervised visitation." As Sophia was led away by her increasingly concerned attorney, I leaned against the wall, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over me. I had temporary custody of my grandson. James's concerns had been validated by a court of law. Lucas would be protected, at least for now. "What happens next?" I asked Thomas, my voice barely steady. "We pick up Lucas from school, explain the situation as gently as possible with the help of his counselor, and begin establishing a stable routine." He touched my shoulder supportively. "The hard part is just beginning, Eleanor. But for today, at least, Lucas is safe." In a tense courtroom showdown, Judge Carlton grants me temporary custody of Lucas after reviewing our compelling evidence. Sophia's mask of devoted motherhood shatters with the ruling, revealing the rage beneath her calculated performance. As she threatens that this isn't over, I prepare for the challenging task ahead, helping my grieving grandson understand these new arrangements while bracing for whatever counterattack Sophia is already planning. For now, though, Lucas is protected, and James's foresight has been vindicated. "Grandma, is Mom ever coming back?" Lucas's question pierced my heart as we sat on the porch swing 6 weeks after the emergency custody hearing. His small legs dangled, not quite reaching the floor, as he stared at the driveway where Sophia's car would normally appear for her supervised visits. Visits she had attended only sporadically over the past month and a half. "Your mom is going through a difficult time," I answered carefully, choosing words the family therapist had suggested. "She loves you, but sometimes adults struggle with big changes." Lucas nodded with a wisdom beyond his 8 years. "Like when Dad died, and she started staying out late?" His perception sometimes startled me. "Children notice so much more than we give them credit for." "Something like that," I agreed, pulling him closer to my side. "How are you feeling about everything?" He considered this seriously, brow furrowed in concentration. "Sad sometimes, but not scared anymore." "Scared?" I prompted gently. "When Mom talked about Arizona, I was scared all the time," he admitted. "I didn't want to leave my school and my friends and you. And I didn't like Richard. He always talked to me like I was a baby or not there at all." Each of these revelations was carefully noted in my ongoing documentation. The court-appointed evaluator had been meeting with Lucas weekly, and with me and Sophia separately. The comprehensive assessment that Judge Carlton had ordered was nearing completion, with the final custody hearing scheduled for next week. The week since gaining temporary guardianship had been both challenging and healing. Lucas had initially been confused and upset when we explained the new arrangement, but his counselor had helped frame it as a special time with Grandma while Mom sorts out grown-up problems. The stability of routine, regular meals, consistent bedtimes, homework help, and predictable expectations had gradually eased his anxiety. Sophia's reaction had been volatile and erratic. She attended the first few supervised visits with obvious resentment, spending much of the time on her phone or asking Lucas leading questions about whether he was happy or if I was being mean to him. Then she canceled 2 visits in a row, claiming work emergencies. When she returned, her approach had shifted to bringing expensive gifts and making elaborate promises about future trips and experiences. The most telling visit had been 3 weeks ago, when she arrived with Richard Harlow unexpectedly in tow, attempting to circumvent the court order specifying who could be present. When the visitation supervisor refused to allow Richard to join, Sophia had stormed out, leaving Lucas in tears, and without the visit he'd been anticipating all week. She hadn't come for the past 2 scheduled visits at all. "Do you think you'll feel ready for the talk with the judge next week?" I asked Lucas, referring to the in-chambers conversation Judge Carlton had scheduled. The therapist had been preparing him, explaining that the judge simply wanted to hear his thoughts and feelings, not force him to choose between his mother and grandmother. "I guess so," he replied, kicking his feet rhythmically. "Ms. Abernathy said I just have to tell the truth about what makes me feel safe and happy." "That's exactly right," I assured him, though my own stomach knotted at the thought of Lucas facing such adult responsibilities. The next day brought an unexpected development. Thomas called early in the morning, his usually measured tone edged with urgency. "Eleanor, Sophia's attorney just filed a motion to dismiss the custody case. They're requesting an immediate return to the original arrangement with no restrictions." My hand tightened on the phone. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming the evidence was manufactured, that you manipulated Lucas into making statements against his mother, and that Sophia's parenting decisions were reasonable responses to grief." My heart sank. "Do they have any chance of succeeding?" "Ordinarily, I'd say no. Our documentation is too thorough. The psychological evaluation's too clear." Thomas paused. "But there's a complication. Richard Harlow has connections with Judge Blackwell, who's been assigned to hear this motion while Judge Carlton is on medical leave." The implications were clear. Money and influence could potentially override weeks of careful evidence gathering and professional evaluations. "What can we do?" I asked, trying to keep panic from my voice. "I'm filing counter motions immediately. But Eleanor, there's something else you should know. Our investigator reports that Sophia and Richard have put deposits on property in the Cayman Islands, a jurisdiction with limited enforcement of U.S. custody orders." The threat crystallized with horrifying clarity. If Sophia regained custody, even temporarily, she could potentially take Lucas out of the country to a place where our legal protections would be difficult to enforce. "She wouldn't," I began, then stopped myself. Of course she would. Everything I'd learned about Sophia in these weeks confirmed she viewed Lucas primarily as an accessory to the life she wanted, not as a vulnerable child with his own needs. "I'm implementing additional safeguards," Thomas assured me. "I've requested an emergency hearing with Judge Carlton upon her return next week. In the meantime, document everything. Any communications from Sophia, any reactions from Lucas, anything unusual at all." That evening, as Lucas worked on a school project about family traditions, my phone chimed with a text from Sophia. "We need to talk privately, without lawyers. Meet me tomorrow 2 p.m. at Riverside Park. Come alone or deals off." I showed the message to Thomas immediately, who advised against meeting her without witnesses. "This is exactly the kind of end run around proper channels that concerns me," he warned. Against his advice, I arranged to meet Sophia, but not alone. Thomas would be nearby, out of sight but within earshot, and I would record our conversation as permitted by our state's one-party consent laws. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few mothers with toddlers at the distant playground. Sophia sat on a bench overlooking the river, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, her posture rigidly composed. "Thank you for coming," she said as I approached, her tone unexpectedly subdued. "I imagine your attack dog lawyer advised against it." "I'm here because any resolution that helps Lucas is worth exploring," I replied neutrally, taking a seat beside her but maintaining distance. Sophia was silent for a long moment, watching the river flow past. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "I'm dropping the custody case." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't among them. "What? You heard me." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes ringed with uncharacteristic fatigue. "I'm signing over full custody to you. No more court battles, no more supervised visits, no more evaluations and judgments." I studied her face, searching for the manipulation behind this sudden capitulation. "Why? Richard and I are moving to Grand Cayman next month. He's secured development rights for a major resort property." She spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing a change in dinner plans rather than abandoning her child. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime. We'll be there at least 3 years establishing the project." "And Lucas?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shrugged slightly. "Lucas needs stability, structure, all those things the evaluators keep emphasizing. I can't provide that right now, not with the demands of relocating and launching a major development." The clinical detachment with which she discussed leaving her son, her only child, who had just lost his father, left me momentarily speechless. "So you're just walking away?" I finally managed. I prefer to think of it as making the mature, responsible choice. Her tone suggested she expected praise for this decision. "I'm putting Lucas's needs first by recognizing you're better positioned to meet them right now." "Right now?" I echoed. "For the foreseeable future," she clarified. "I'll send support payments, of course, make video calls when possible. Perhaps he could visit during school holidays eventually." The casual way she outlined transitioning from mother to distant relative made my heart ache for Lucas. Yet beneath my sadness was profound relief. Lucas would be spared further custody battles, further disappointments, further insecurity about his future. "What do you want from me?" I asked directly, sensing there must be conditions to this offer. "A clean break," she replied immediately. "No contested hearings, no forensic financial investigations, no further intrusion into my personal affairs. Sign the agreement my lawyer is drafting, and Lucas stays with you while I start fresh." "And the house? James's accounts?" I wasn't concerned about material assets, but I wanted to understand her complete proposition. "Keep them," she said with a dismissive wave. "Richard's development will make those look like pocket change. I just want this chapter closed cleanly and quickly." As she outlined the details of her proposed arrangement, I maintained a neutral expression while inwardly marveling at the outcome James had somehow foreseen. His careful planning, transferring assets to me, documenting Sophia's behavior, establishing trusts for Lucas, had anticipated exactly this scenario. Sophia choosing her own desires over her son's needs when forced to face the responsibilities of genuine parenting. 1 week later, I sat in Judge Carlton's chambers as she reviewed the voluntary custody agreement Sophia had signed the day before, departing for Grand Cayman with Richard. "This is an unusual resolution," the judge commented, studying the document carefully. "Ms. Jensen is surrendering all parental rights except for limited visitation at your discretion. She believes it's in Lucas's best interest while she relocates internationally for an extended period," I explained, using the diplomatic phrasing Thomas had suggested. Judge Carlton's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by this characterization, but she nodded slowly. "And you're prepared to assume full legal guardianship of your grandson at your age, Mrs. Reynolds?" "Without hesitation," I replied firmly. "Lucas needs stability, love, and connection to his father's memory. I can provide all three." The judge studied me thoughtfully before signing the final orders. "Based on all evidence presented throughout these proceedings, as well as Ms. Jensen's voluntary relinquishment, custody of Lucas Reynolds is hereby granted to Eleanor Reynolds, with arrangements for support payments and limited visitation as outlined in the agreement." Outside the courthouse, with Lucas waiting at home with the kind neighbor who'd helped us throughout this journey, I finally allowed myself to absorb the magnitude of what had happened. I had become, in every meaningful sense, my grandson's parent, a role I had never anticipated at 65, but one I embraced with complete commitment. "James would be proud," Thomas said quietly as we walked to our cars. "He protected Lucas the only way he could, by entrusting him to you." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Lucas and I planted a memorial garden in the backyard. James's favorite flowers and plants arranged around a small stone bench where we could sit and talk to Dad whenever Lucas felt the need. "Do you think Dad knew Mom would leave?" Lucas asked as we patted soil around a young rosebush. The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. "I think your father knew that sometimes adults make choices based on what they want rather than what children need," I answered carefully. "And he wanted to make sure you'd always have someone who put you first." Lucas nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "I miss Dad every day, but I don't miss how things were after he died, when Mom was always angry or gone. Your dad made sure you'd be taken care of," I said, pulling him into a gentle hug. "And that's exactly what I intend to do, for as long as you need me." That evening, as Lucas slept peacefully upstairs, I sat in James's study, now a shared space where Lucas did homework while I handled household management, and opened the small box of personal items Thomas had delivered after the final custody arrangement. Inside was one last letter from my son, marked, "When it's resolved." "Mom, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't. Protected Lucas from a situation I saw deteriorating, but couldn't fix in time. I watched Sophia's priorities shift, saw her resentment of family responsibilities grow, noticed her increasing absences. When I discovered her relationship with Richard, I realized Lucas would eventually become collateral damage in her pursuit of the life she really wanted. I'm sorry for the burden I placed on you. Asking a mother to step in as parent again at your age wasn't fair, but I knew you would do it without hesitation, just as you've always put family first. Lucas couldn't ask for a better guardian, a more loving presence, or a stronger advocate. Tell him stories about me, not just the good ones, the real ones, about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them, about how sometimes we see the truth too late, but we do the best we can with the time we have. I love you both more than words can express. James, I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing freely now that Lucas couldn't see. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined. The grief of losing James compounded by the battles with Sophia, and the challenge of helping Lucas heal from multiple traumas. Yet as I looked around the home we now shared permanently, at the evidence of a child growing secure and loved, homework spread across the table, soccer cleats by the door, artwork taped proudly to the refrigerator, I knew James had been right to trust me with his most precious legacy. Through his foresight in changing his will, through my careful documentation and strategic patience, through Lucas's remarkable resilience, we had created something beautiful from tragedy. A new family constellation, different than what any of us had expected, but solid and true. Some might call it justice, that Sophia had ultimately chosen freedom over motherhood, revealing precisely the character James had anticipated. But I preferred to think of it as redemption. The chance to honor my son by raising his child with the values he cherished, ensuring that despite everything, love would have the final word in our story. Sophia voluntarily surrenders custody to pursue her new life with Richard in the Cayman Islands. The resolution James somehow foresaw becomes reality, not through bitter court battles, but through Sophia's own choice to prioritize her desires over her son's needs. As Lucas and I build our new life together, I discover one final letter from James, acknowledging the burden he placed on me while expressing complete trust in my ability to give his son the love and stability he deserves. From tragedy has come an unexpected second chance at family, different than any of us imagined, but precious beyond measure. 3 years later, "Grandma, I got the lead in the school play!" Lucas burst through the front door, his 11-year-old energy filling the house as he dropped his backpack and thrust a script into my hands. 3 years had transformed the quiet, anxious 8-year-old into a confident, thriving middle schooler whose smile now reached his eyes consistently. "That's wonderful," I examined the script. "Our Town," by Thornton Wilder. "Playing George Gibbs is a big responsibility. I'm so proud of you. Ms. Larson said Dad played the same role when he was in 8th grade. Did you know that?" My heart warmed at his casual reference to James. We'd worked hard to keep his father's memory alive through stories, photos, and the small traditions we maintained. Saturday morning pancakes, summer fishing trips to James's favorite lake, the memory garden we tended together. I certainly did. I still have the program somewhere in the attic boxes. Your father was quite the actor in school. I smiled, remembering teenage James nervously practicing lines in our living room. He'd be thrilled to see you following in his footsteps. Lucas grinned, then his expression turned more serious. "Do you think, should we tell Mom about the play?" The question didn't surprise me. Though Sophia had essentially vanished from Lucas's life after moving to Grand Cayman, her promised video calls dwindling to rare, awkward birthday messages and eventually stopping altogether, Lucas occasionally still sought connection with her. "We can send her an email with the dates," I said carefully. "It's entirely up to you." He considered this, then shook his head. "Maybe not. She didn't answer when I wrote about winning the science fair, and she's probably still in Asia with Richard anyway." Through infrequent updates from Thomas, who maintained minimal professional contact with Sophia's attorney regarding support payments, we knew she and Richard had married and were now developing resort properties in Thailand. The support checks arrived regularly, the one commitment she maintained, but contained no personal notes or inquiries about Lucas's well-being. "Whatever you decide is fine," I assured him, maintaining the balanced approach our family therapist had recommended, acknowledging Sophia's existence without creating false expectations of her return or involvement. "I think just you and the Wilsons and Uncle Thomas is enough audience for me." Lucas decided, referring to our neighbors who had become like extended family, and to Thomas Bennett, who had transitioned from James's attorney to a cherished uncle figure in Lucas's life. As Lucas bounded upstairs to start homework, I moved to the kitchen to prepare dinner, pausing to adjust the collection of photos on the refrigerator, Lucas winning his karate tournament, building a science project, laughing with friends at his last birthday party. A visual timeline of healing and growth. The journey hadn't always been smooth. The first year after gaining full custody had brought nightmares, academic struggles, and occasional angry outbursts as Lucas processed the effective loss of both parents. There had been challenging questions I'd struggled to answer. Why doesn't Mom want to talk to me anymore? Did I do something wrong to make her leave? If Dad hadn't died, would Mom have stayed? With the help of an excellent child psychologist, we'd navigated these painful waters together. I'd learned to validate his feelings without vilifying Sophia, to help him understand that her choices reflected her limitations, not his worthiness. Now, 3 years later, Lucas had found his footing. His grades were excellent, his circle of friends solid, his emotional resilience remarkable for a child who had experienced such significant losses. The house that had once been James's, then briefly mine, had truly become ours, filled with evidence of our shared life. Lucas's art projects displayed alongside my watercolor attempts, his sports equipment sharing space with my gardening tools, photo albums documenting our camping trips and holiday celebrations. At 68, I had found unexpected vitality in this second round of parenting. The responsibility had given me purpose, while Lucas's energy kept me active and engaged. I'd even started dating recently. A kind widower I'd met through the community theater where Lucas took acting classes. Nothing serious yet, but a pleasant reminder that life continued to offer surprises at every stage. My phone chimed with a text message from Thomas. Court approved the college fund restructuring, all set for Lucas's future education, protected exactly as James wanted. Another piece of James's careful planning falling into place. Despite Sophia's initial attempts to gain control of Lucas's educational trust, James's foresight had created ironclad protections. Now those funds were secured in a structure that would provide for Lucas's college and perhaps even graduate education, regardless of what happened to me in the coming years. As I prepared dinner, I reflected on the strange path that had brought us here, the midnight call that had shattered our world, the gradual revelation of Sophia's true character, the careful strategy that had ultimately protected Lucas from becoming collateral damage in her pursuit of a different life. In my darkest moments during those early days after James's death, I couldn't have imagined the life Lucas and I would build from the ashes of that tragedy. The grief remained, would always remain, but it had been integrated into a new reality, filled with meaningful connections and moments of genuine joy. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw our neighbor Mrs. Wilson holding a covered dish. "I made too much lasagna again," she announced as I opened the door, her standard excuse for the meals she regularly shared with us. "And Bill wants to know if Lucas is still coming to help with the birdhouse project this weekend." "He's been talking about nothing else," I confirmed, accepting the dish gratefully. "Would you and Bill like to join us for dinner? Lucas just got some exciting news about the school play." As Mrs. Wilson stepped inside, calling up the stairs to congratulate Lucas, who responded with enthusiastic thanks, I felt the quiet satisfaction of community, of the support network we'd built around ourselves that extended beyond biological family. Later that evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, I sat in the peaceful quiet of the living room and opened the memory book we'd created during that first difficult year. Photos of James at various ages. Lucas's childish handwriting describing favorite memories of his father. Cards from friends and family offering support during our custody journey. On the final page was a quote from James's last letter to me. "Tell him stories about me, not just the good ones, the real ones, about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them." I had honored that request, sharing with Lucas the full, human truth of his father. A good man who had recognized his marriage was failing, who had seen the potential impact on his son, who had taken concrete steps to protect his child's future even while hoping those protections wouldn't be necessary. When Lucas had asked why his father had changed his will without telling Sophia, I'd explained as gently as possible. "Your dad saw that your mom was making choices that might not prioritize your needs. He wanted to make sure someone would always put you first, no matter what. It was the truth, simplified for a child's understanding, but honest. We had maintained that honesty throughout our journey together, building trust through difficult conversations rather than comfortable evasions. Outside, the garden James had loved and Lucas now helped tend caught the last golden light of evening. The roses he'd planted were blooming again, a reminder that life continues its cycles regardless of our personal losses. Inside, his son slept peacefully, surrounded by photos of the father who had loved him enough to ensure his protection even after death. As I closed the memory book and prepared for bed myself, I thought about James's extraordinary foresight. He couldn't have known exactly how events would unfold, couldn't have predicted his own untimely death or Sophia's eventual complete departure from Lucas's life. Yet he had recognized the essential character of the woman he'd married, had seen the warning signs of her prioritizing personal desires over family responsibilities, and had taken concrete steps to protect what mattered most to him. In doing so, he'd given both Lucas and me an unexpected gift, not just financial security or legal protection, but the opportunity to forge a new family bond that might never have developed otherwise. Through our shared grief and subsequent healing, Lucas and I had created something beautiful and enduring, a relationship built on mutual trust, respect, and genuine love that transcended traditional family boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, helping Lucas memorize lines for his play, attending my own water aerobics class that kept my joints mobile, coordinating with Thomas about long-term financial planning. Ordinary life continuing in its imperfect, precious way. But tonight, in the quiet of the home we had made together, I felt profound gratitude for my son's final gift, the chance to help raise his child, to see James's best qualities emerging in Lucas, to ensure that despite everything, love and wisdom would be his son's true inheritance. Not the legacy any of us would have chosen, perhaps, but one we had transformed through courage and persistence and boundless love into something unexpectedly beautiful.